Have a 2014 Chevy Malibu here, and today we're going to be replacing the front brakes and rotors. So the first thing I'm going to do is put some blocking behind the rear tires. Now we'll just loosen the lug nuts while the car is on the ground, but not remove them. Once they've been removed, we're just going to jack up the car using the brace underneath. Now we're just going to put the car down onto a jack stand. I'm going to leave the other jack in place, and we can proceed to remove the lug nuts and the tire. Once the tire is removed, I'm just going to place it under the car just as an extra safety precaution. Now I just turn the wheel to the right so that I can have easier access to the bolts at the back. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is remove these 14mm bolts here that are holding on the caliper. There's one there and one there. And we'll have to put a wrench in here so that they don't slip. We need a bit of an extension for the top one so that we can go underneath the brake hose. Once the two bolts have been removed, we're gently going to remove the caliper, and we're just going to be very careful not to bend or break that hose there, and then we'll just hang it from the frame up here. So we'll do that by just wiggling it here. Once it's off, I'm just going to use a hanger to hang it from the spring there, and being careful not to put any tension or kinks in that hose. Now we're ready to remove the caliper bracket with these two bolts here. They're 21mm, and they're going to be torqued on to about 125 foot-pounds, so they're going to be a little bit tricky to get off. You're going to probably need a breaker bar, so we'll work on those next. And they're also thread locked, so it'll definitely require a breaker bar or a longer socket with some extra leverage. So we got our breaker bar hooked up, and we're able to break those free. Now we can use a socket wrench to take the rest of the way. Once those two bolts have been removed, we should be able to just remove the caliper bracket with the brake pads. Now we're ready to remove the rotor, but first we got to remove this screw here. It's a torque screw, so we're just going to remove that, and then we should be able to pull the rotor off. These screws have been removed, so we can just gently wiggle this rotor off. Now I'm just going to use a wire brush and clean off as much of the loose rust as I can off of the hub. All right, before we put the new rotor on, just want to give the hub a good coat of anti-seize. This just make it a little easier to take it off again in the future. Alright, so the hub has a good coat of anti-seize. Now we're ready to put the new rotor on, but before we do, we just need to spray it with brake cleaner first. The reason being is that they put some product on to basically avoid any rusting while it's in its packaging, so we need to just remove that material first. So we will give it a good spray. And then we can wipe it off with some blue towel. All right, so we put the new rotor on, and we just want to make sure that we're careful to line up the hole there with the screw. And then we're ready to repeat the same process on the front side. We'll spray it down with some brake cleaner and clean it off. Now we're going to replace the screw. We're just going to hand tighten it just to make sure that we don't cross thread it. Then we'll tighten it the rest of the way with our socket. Now we're ready to remove the brake pads from the caliper bracket. I'm just going to pinch those in. Same on the other side. Should just slide in. So depending on the brake pads, they may or may not come with new metal clips. Ours did, so I'm just going to use a screwdriver and pry these off, both sides. This one as well. Now I'm just going to use a wire brush and just clean off these contact points, both sides. Now we should be able to just snap our new brackets in place, both sides. So the brake pads are going to slide on these bars here. So we're going to, as you can see, with old brake pad, just slide in there, and then this on this back portion here. So we're going to add some grease that was provided in the brake pad kit to the contact points here and here. Now ready to put our brake pads in place. and we have two different types here. One with a little metal pin here at the end, and one without. So the one with the metal pin is going to go on the side with the two bolts here. So we're going to make sure that we slide this one into place this way, and then we'll slide the other one in place on the other side. Okay, so we have our brake pads in place, so we're ready to now take the caliper and slide it right back on top of our rotor here. All right, so once it's in place, we can replace our 21mm bolts. Before we do that, I'm just going to add a little bit of thread locker to the end of them. Then we'll just hand tighten them to get them started so that they make sure that they're not cross-threaded. We're just going to use a torque wrench and torque these to 120 foot-pounds. We're ready to put our caliper back in place, but before we do that, we need to pop the hood, and we're going to open up the brake fluid container. All right, so I'm just going to remove the cap for the brake fluid. Put it right there. The reason why we want to do that is we want to compress this piston, brake piston here, and return the fluid back into the container. So we're going to use a piston compressor and gently push this back so that the fluid returns back to the reservoir. All right, so we have our piston clamp in place. We're just going to gently turn it and make sure that this piston returns back into the compartment here. All right, so our piston is now compressed. We can now put the caliper back on top. And we're just going to line up these bolts again and hand tighten them again just so that they're not cross-threaded. So they go in nice and easy. We'll do the same for the bottom one right here. And we're going to torque these two bolts to 25 foot-pounds. Now we can replace our brake cap. All right, we straightened out the wheel and we're ready to put the tire back on. So we'll just hand tighten these lug nuts first to make sure that they're not cross-threaded. All right, now we'll tighten them in a crossing pattern. Now we're ready to remove the jack stand, and then we'll retighten these once the car is on the ground. Now I'm just going to torque these lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds in an alternating crisscross pattern. And last but not least, we need to pump the brakes a few times just to make sure that we return the brake fluid back into the pistons. That's how to replace the front brake pads and rotors on a 2014 Chevy Malibu. Hope this video helps somebody else.